Hello everyone and welcome to another Salesforce Ben LinkedIn Live collaboration. I'm delighted to have everyone here with us today, and we've got a really exciting session lined up for you. So today we're going to explore how you can increase your productivity by harnessing the power of reactive components in your screen flows. So we'll be discussing the benefits of reactivity and how it enables you to build bigger, more dynamic screen flows. So while we wait for everyone to join, let us know where you're logging in from today. We always love to see what a global audience we have attending. Okay, let's get started. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. My name is Zaina Dar, and I'm the events content producer at Salesforce Ben, and I'll be your host for this event. I'm thrilled to introduce to you our flow expert, Adam White, who is here with us today to talk about how to make your screen flows reactive and take your Salesforce game to the next level. Would you like to introduce yourself, Adam?
Sure. Thanks, Hannah. So, Adam White, Director of Product Management on the Automation Services team, specifically ScreenFlows. I'm really excited to be showing off the next-gen bleeding edge stuff we've got going on in ScreenFlow land.
Nice. Great, thank you. So before we get started, we have a few house rules to go over. So as this is a webinar, all lines are muted, but don't worry, we'll be having a Q&A at the end for you to ask Adam any burning questions you may have. So feel free to submit the questions in the comments throughout the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded and will be available on our Salesforce Ben LinkedIn and YouTube channel, just in case you need to drop off or would like to share it with your colleagues. Brilliant. Well, I'll hand it over to you, Adam, to take us through the presentation, and I'll see you at the end for the Q&A.
Right. Sounds great. All right. So hopefully everyone can see my screen here. So as I said before, I'll be taking you all through reactive screen components and what we've got cooking in ScreenFlow, and with a little bit of dash of roadmap at the end. So I do kind of want to keep this as interactive as possible. I know we might have a lot of folks in the chat, so I'll try to respond as much as I can as I'm demoing things. But because we are doing some roadmap items, I have to also have this obligatory slide on forward-looking statements. So please make all purchasing decisions based off currently available services and products. So I already said I'm a ScreenFlow product manager, but what I also didn't mention was that I'm a former solution architect and solo administrator. I actually have 13 certifications, certified application architect. I've been with Salesforce for about 3 years. I started off in our professional services group as an architect, and then moved over to the product management space. So I loved building flows back in my implementation days, specifically ScreenFlows. May or may not have been called a wizard in that area back in my day, but really excited to be showing off what we have with ScreenFlows today. All right, so I will preface this by saying I'm not going to be diving into a lot of beginner topics today. It's going to be fairly intermediate to advanced, but that's not to say it's more of an aspirational thing. So if you see some things in here that you want to learn more about, happy to respond either via chat or provide some documentation afterward. So with that said, why would you want to be reactive, and what does it mean to be reactive? Well, it benefits everyone and not just users. So we're going to talk you through the current problem state, and this series of pictures is going to resonate with a lot of you. If I were in like a Dreamforce chat or a TDX chat, I'd be asking you all to raise your hands if this resonated with you. Probably does. ScreenFlows historically have what I could say suffered really from a lack of component interaction. So changes in one place affect changes in other places. So always people would have to click next just to get components to respond. And if you didn't like that, you had to build these large monolithic LWC components. This actually has some repercussions for end users, right? Excessive clicking leads to mistakes and abandonment. People might get frustrated with their flow. Leads to what I call decision fatigue. When they're jumping around between screens, they might forget what they entered 3 screens ago or even the last screen. So that can actually lead to mistakes. And then what I call abandoned use cases. So scenarios where you might want to use a flow for a long form, like an application, kind of don't work too well because you really need that intercomponent interaction. So to get that great reactivity, you had to ask a developer to create a really big screen component that really just looked like a single component on a screen. So that has some challenges. There's no reuse in that. You can't put it in a different screen because it was tailored specifically for that use case. And not only that, it leads to little collaboration between admins and devs. So if you wanted the smallest little label change in your LWC, you had to get a developer to update the code, redeploy it. kind of a pain. And that means there's not much collaboration between the two groups. And at that point, you really may as well just go full LWC. Flow really didn't offer any major benefits aside from just orchestrating your LWCs one screen after the other. Enter reactive components. So for the end users, it means faster form completions. Users have all the data that they need to make decisions on their forms, which speeds up their form completion rates. And they have fewer mistakes. So because they're not jumping around between screens, they have all the data that they need in one place, meaning fewer data entry errors. And lastly, it accelerates development and busts down those developer and admin silos, because developers can now create generic modular components that enables the whole team to work together and save time. So now developers can create modular blocks, which gives those flow builders I just call bag of Lego blocks to be able to use in different flows to solve new challenges, which means developers can not have to worry about recreating the wheel. They can focus on new challenges that are unique and more valuable to them. So reactivity kind of sounds scary, and it kind of was, way back in the day when Flow didn't have it. But now all you really need to do is just reference a component on the same screen. So I have a really basic use case here where I've got some display text and a data table reference, and that's all you really need to do. Just refer to the component that you need wherever you want to respond. So here I have a data table row and some display text. And on the right, you can kind of see what it looks like when you actually run the flow. The user selects a different row. That display text is then updated. All right, so here we're going to be spending a lot of time within Salesforce. So hopefully you all will be able to ask questions if you all are a little confused, but it's going to be fun. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up the scenario. So I have this flow here that has different levels of reactivity. So what life was like before reactivity is the first scenario I'm going to show. So the scenario here is I am, let's say, a sales rep, and I want to add some products to an opportunity. But I also want to give it a discount because I want that deal. Now, here's the scenario. I've got a flow launched from an account page, and I've got some opportunities here. So I'll select my opportunity. And then I want to get the products tied to a price book. So we'll just say that this account is an MVP customer, and I want those products tied to that price book. So I'll select the price book. I'll select a discount. Now, remember, this is pre-reactivity days. So we'll just say, I want 35% discount. I have no idea what it is until I hit next. Oh, it turns out there's a threshold that I have to hit. So this is going to be submitted for approval. I don't want that. So I'm going to try and get it right below the threshold. Let's see if 25% does it. Nope. Still too much. So you can kind of see how frustrating this is for end users, where they're, they take a guess on what that discount might be. They hit next, still below, still very frustrating. Let's see if 12% does it. Yep, right under 1,000. So they hit next, and they create those opportunity line items. So kind of frustrating. You can see how end users would get a little jaded with things with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip right to the most advanced reactivity version of this, and we'll dive into how it was built. So first step, same deal. We'll select our opportunity. Now here's where it starts to get interesting. I'll select my price book, and then something magical happened behind the scenes, which I'll share in a minute. And based off of that price book, I got the available products and prices for that price book. So we'll do the same thing. We'll select our elite service package for that opportunity. And notice some super fun reactive formulas and display text at work here. So same deal, no screen switching at all, with a little bit of display text fun. We got it right under the threshold that we needed. And then we're done. So super, super great for end users. Let's see how that was built. So let's go into the first screen here. You'll notice I started off the flow by just getting the opportunities and the price book before the screen ever hits. So lots of conditional visibility. So nothing new there. That's been an amazing feature that's been in screen flows for a number of years. So as a user selects the different rows, we progressively disclose the different parts of those data tables. So here's an interesting one here. So this is a custom component available on the App Exchange called Data Fetcher. Now, again, this is more of an advanced use case, and I'll show you how we're going to make this easier in the future in a minute. But for now, I'll show you how it was built. So what this component does, and this is available on the App Exchange, and it's also free, by the way, on Salesforce Labs, built by a lovely person named Josh Damon over at Salesforce. He's a solution architect in our services group. And so what this does is you pass in basically just a SOQL query string that's built using a formula. And what it does is when you set it up, you set up what object you want it to retrieve. And if I hop into this query, it is a basic SOQL query. So if you know SOQL, you can use this. And you'll notice the special sauce here is this right here. It's just a reference to that price book data table. So as that data table row or the selection changes, this will change real time as well. And it'll update data real time. And so if I scroll down, my data table uses that data fetcher output right here. That's really all you need to do. So as this changes, it gets new records, and this updates at the same time. And so as soon as a user selects a row from that data table, that's when we have our references down here. So we've got our slider percentage, our display text. I have this fun little SLDS hack, not really a hack really because it's fully supported, but display text will render SLDS. So there's a great article that I'll link in my trail mix at the end, written by Jeff Kranz, that talks about how you can basically level up your screen flows and to make them look a lot nicer with SLDS, with still zero code. I mean, technically SLDS is code, but you're not having to write Apex or LWC to do this. And we actually have a TDX session on that. I believe it's on Wednesday. So if you're attending TDX, there's a session dedicated to this specifically, which is going to be super awesome. Slight digression there. Sorry about that. Just stylized flows get me super excited. So down here, we have our formula that displays the discount. So if I can show you that real fast as well. This is just a standard sales flow formula where we have the different references on the screen components. And it's updated real time. All right, so I dropped a little hint that we're going to make that data fetching part a little easier. So for those of you that follow me on LinkedIn, you may have noticed I dropped a huge bombshell I guess it was Monday, talking about our new feature we have coming soon called action buttons. So I'm going to be showing off what it looks like on the front end first, and then I'll dive into how it was set up and configured, and you all are welcome to ask more questions too. All right, so I have a show me the future option here. So this is going to be the same flow, just slightly different with the new features. So same deal here. We'll select our opportunity, select our price book. And then we have this button appear called Get Service Packages. So we're going to click that. And what this does is it launches an auto-launched flow that can then retrieve data, crunch data, call out to external systems, whatever the heck you want. If it's an auto-launched flow, you can put it in a button. So now that we have that data back into the flow, I'm also trying to look at the chat here. And yes, we did do a forward-looking statement at the very beginning. So we have our service package here, and then from here on out, everything is basically the same. And then what I ended up doing, since this is our future flow here, I have our new component called the repeater component. So for those of you that have built a lot of screen flows, you'll be very familiar with a pattern where if you need a user to create an unknown number of records in a screen, you're probably going to have a small little section of data a checkbox that asks them if they want to add a new record. Right after that, you have a decision that looks at whether or not they check that box. Then they'll go right back to the very last screen to add another record. So this is specifically meant to replace that whole process because it's going to be a lot nicer. So what we're going to do here is associate contacts to the opportunity that we picked in that first step. So we have contacts tied to that account here. We pick a contact role, the primary contact, add another contact, then you keep going. And what I do is I throw all of that into a data table, a read-only data table for them to look at. And then we create the role records for that opportunity. It makes it super easy. Would have taken a lot longer without A, screen flows, B, reactivity, and C, repeaters. This process is so much cleaner. So if I hop in to how this was configured, here's where the kind of the drum roll happens. So right now, this is not available in orgs. This is only my personal org here that this is available, this action button component. So this UX will be a little different when we hit beta. We did some cleanup with some of these things. So just take note of that. Basically what you do, and actually I'll start from scratch here so you can kind of see what it looks like. So you'll provide your API name for your button, your label, which will be what the users can see when they run it. And you select your active auto launch flow. So I have my auto launch flows here. And honestly, one of the things that we changed for the beta is this is no longer a drop down. It's like a lookup. So it's a lot easier to find flows. So you'll select your action and then you get taken into, let me just remove that just in case. You'll get taken into this configuration panel. So if you know how to use subflows, this is exactly the same process. So as long as your flows are, your inputs and outputs are marked appropriately in your subflow or your auto launch flow, you'll feel right at home here. So for this, I like to name things appropriately so it's a little easier to understand. So I have this little variable here called input price book ID. So this is just the selected row of the data table. And one cool thing, tap my team, tap ourselves on the back here for what we did here. But one cool thing that we did here is we always show the outputs. So with subflows, you can't actually see the outputs. I'd love to bring this over to the subflow window at some point too. But one thing is that you can always see everything that action will output. So you don't have to click in the advanced tab and click assign resources just to see all the things that it can output. So super easy to see all the things that it can do down below. And then here's where we get into some new stuff here. So our data table here uses the results of our action. So I'll just clear this out so you can kind of see the traversal that happens. So I'll scroll down. We have a new section called Screen Actions. We drill into our results. And we look for our found price book entries. And if you're curious, I'll just kind of show you what else. Actually, you know what? I'm going to show that in a minute when we do our deep dive for action buttons. And that's it. So we'll talk a little bit about what a good action flow looks like. And frankly, it hasn't been released yet. So we're still kind of figuring out what the right architectural patterns for you advanced users might be. But I have some ideas based off my experience. The other thing I wanted to show off is the repeater. So again, this is beta right now. Hopefully, we are aiming to go GA next release with full component support. So right now, we have a subset of components that are supported and features. So there's no conditional visibility. There's no input validation, but that's all coming. So here we have our radio buttons and our checkbox. And then what we do is the repeater is essentially its own data structure. So you have to, at the moment, loop over the repeater. And it appears as all items. So then after that, and ignore this little query within a loop here. This is just for demonstration purposes. Don't do this at home. But within our repeater, we then assign each of the components within the repeater to different variables. and then add them to a collection. So here we're just creating a collection of roll records. Down the line, we want to support repeaters within transform. So instead of doing a loop, you'll be able to use transform to transform the results of a repeater. And then we'll be done. All right, so I'm going to scan the chat here, see if I can answer any quick questions. So the error that showed up after the discount value, that is kind of like a warning. It doesn't prevent a user from progressing to the next screen. It was just display text with conditional visibility. That's a whole nother topic that my team is going to be exploring probably late next year, early next year, around better validations in your screens, things like that. So that's definitely in our purview for sure. But for now, this demo was just conditional visibility. And Christy, your question about reactivity. Yep, reactivity is GA. It went GA in winter, last 2 releases ago. And repeaters are beta, yes, in spring. Let's see. We'll be able to have a repeater that pulls in dynamic number of records. Good question. I will cover that in the roadmap section. Short answer is yes, eventually, but not for GA. And will we use dynamic forms inside the repeater anytime soon? What about limiting the number of repetitions? No for dynamic forms fields. Yes, eventually to limiting the amount of repetitions. I actually think when we pre-fill repeater rows, it's going to be really important to limit the amount of rows. All right, I'm going to move on, and then hopefully I can answer some of your questions as I go through the demo. All right, so this is more of a drill in for action buttons. So a single screen here. Scenario here, there's no actual use case. So this is more of, consider this more of a tech demo. So what I have here is your vanilla lookup field and an action button that gets opportunities. And it takes in that lookup record ID and record ID collection. So for those of you that weren't aware, lookup can actually allow users to select multiple records if you set this maximum selections input. So anything greater than 1 will basically flip it into multi-select mode. It also conveniently outputs a text collection, which you'll see why is handy in a moment. So if you'll remember, I kind of hinted at like what are the right patterns to use for action button flows. And I think they're going to be very similar to subflows. And what does a good subflow look like? Well, it's generic and modular. So you want to focus on reuse. And so I have a little cool trick here where there is an object called entity definition that allows you, based off of a record ID prefix, so the first 3 digits of a record ID, you can actually look up what object that is based off the prefix using this object. So what I do here is based off of that prefix, which is, I'll pop in here for the folks looking on the recording, just looks at the first 3 digits of that record ID. And then based off of the results of that lookup, or the get records, if it's an account, we'll go down the account path. So like, what if you wanted to get opportunities based off of contacts or, users? So this is kind of like meant to be as generic as possible. So for this example, I just built out the basic scenario here. So we'll look up the opportunity based off the provided account ID. So we just use the single record ID, or if we are given a record collection of IDs, which happens to be the direct output of that lookup, we use our in operator with that record collection, and then we output it. So unfortunately, like, I would love for automatic outputs like or get records to just be available in subflows, but for now we do have to assign those results to something that's available outside the flow. So for those of you that know how to use subflows, you create those variables that are available for output. So this makes sure that that base flow can use it. So then we have a data table here based off of the output of our action, those opportunities. Let's not stop there, right? We have reactivity. We have ways to get data on the same screen. We don't need to navigate. So let's add them up. Now, we could do this with the same flow if we wanted to. We could take another approach to say, I just want one flow to do my opportunity summarizing or record summarizing. So that for this demo, we'll just take that route. So we'll have an input called input opportunities to summarize, which is just the selected rows of the data table. And then we have some display text down here that shows the selected amount. So what does that look like? Well, not sure if you all have had a chance to play with the new transform element yet, but transform allows you to do aggregation. So you don't actually need to loop over anything to get a sum of a number field. So what I ended up doing was taking that input of opportunities, mapping it using this new aggregate function. I summarize the amount field, and then I assign the number based off of that transform summary, whatever it's called, that transform aggregation. And then if I run our flow here, I'll select my account. Let's just select 2. Let's see what they all total. Add up opportunities. 449,000. Pretty cool if you ask me. So one thing I did want to call out though that will be available for beta, this looks kind of funky here. So we're actually changing up how this is going to look. So it'll look a little cleaner with commas and whatnot. So just be aware that that's also going to be a little different for the actual beta. All right, so that is the action button. So let me just scan the chat here to see if I can answer any quick questions about it. Can an action button be used as a navigational button? No, not yet. We're still thinking about how we want to handle navigation buttons in the future. If you haven't noticed, within the past year in ScreenFlows, we've really been focusing on foundational items and less on things that you could more or less easily create as a custom component or download, either through the App Exchange or Unofficial SF and places like that. So at the moment, no, we're still trying to think about how we want to handle ad hoc navigation in our flow. All right, so I'm going to save some of these for the Q&A section at the end. I will answer the question about the action button taking up an entire row. Can the component be a smaller size to add more action buttons or other components like text? So you can actually still use sections to do that. So here's an example here where I could drag the button into a section. I could drag another one in here and have 2. Now, one thing I want to try to do for GA for action buttons, which wouldn't be for another 2 releases, is alignment. So being able to align your button within the cell. So hopefully it'll look a little cleaner if you are using this section-based approach. So that is certainly on my mind. All right. Oh, looks like Christy already figured that one out for you. All right. So, oh, here's another question. Is there a way to show a total of data table without needing to do anything more? So I think if you mean like not having to click the button, and if that's the case, stay tuned for that one. That's more of a roadmap thing that I'll be covering in a bit. And there's a question about governor limits and performance. Transform, yes, most definitely. Transform is significantly more performant when doing aggregation compared to a loop. So that's a great question. All right. Let me just double check something here. All right. So let's talk roadmap, and then hopefully we can go into some Q&A. Or at least I'll be able to dive into more detail. Let's see, winter 24 is when we went GA with reactivity. So reactivity was a 3-release effort. At first, we released basic component reactivity through custom components and our out-of-the-box Lightning components. And then we circled back around to enable reactive formulas. I think that's really when people started to get really excited about reactivity, because that started to unlock a whole lot of doors for so many different use cases. And it also we also focused on choice selections, so being able to drive the choices in one component based off of the choices in another. And last release, we GA'd display text reactivity, long text area reactivity, and text template reactivity. So we're pretty much almost done with full component support. There's a few gaps here, namely collection choice sets here on the right, which we're releasing very shortly, which is going to pair beautifully with action buttons. So you'll see here I made a little fictitious GIF here where you're selecting some accounts and getting some contact records, and then you're all done. So what else are we working on? So one of the long-standing items that you haven't been able to do with some of our more basic components like text, date, checkbox, number, is disable fields and make them read-only. A lot of times, if you want to provide summarized data to your end user of like something they did in a previous step, you usually had to use display text. Well, soon you'll be able to mark our inputs as read-only so that you don't have to do all of that fun stuff in display text. Or you could also do disabled fields. So here I have an example where a user has to check like an acknowledgement checkbox in order to enable a bunch of inputs. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get this out next release with a follow-up in the next release for more components like radio buttons, lookup, slider, phone, things like that. So to answer your questions about repeaters, right now we're focusing on what we call the create scenario. So starting from scratch, we're aiming for a GA next release, which is going to include most of our components, with the exception, unfortunately, of action buttons. But because action buttons are still in beta, we want it to be solidified before we get full support. It'll support conditional visibility, validation, and reactivity. And then following that up after that, we're hopeful that we can get in what we call the update scenario. So when you enter the screen, let's say you've got, I don't know, 5 records or 5 repeater rows, 5 siblings that you want populated when you enter the screen. That's going to be our target, our next big thing for repeaters. All right, so this one I think is going to be a popular one. I always try to fit in what I just call paper cuts into releases. So we've been working on action buttons for a very long time, and it has taken up a lot of bandwidth from our engineers, but I do try to fit in little things here and there. And one thing came up at the True to the Core at Dreamforce last year around our address component. So it turns out that if you have state and country pick lists enabled, and you've changed what are called the integration values of those state and country pick lists, if you actually try to use our address component to update a country field or a state field, you'll get an error, and there's no great way around it. So that kind of had us, give a finer tuned comb or a finer look at the address component, see what else we could do with it. Turns out you can't actually make it required or disable it. So we figured let's just overhaul it and add all the things and make it a lot more usable. So we're adding Google Address Lookup, which is going to be awesome and a great improvement for end users. Going to allow people to prevent or require user entry with a required flag and a disabled flag. Then, of course, we're adding the state code and country code outputs if your org has the state and country pick list feature enabled. So this is going to be a great one. I'm really excited for this one, even though it might seem small, but I think it'll make a big impact. All right, so here are a few more things. This first one is, I think, probably the coolest bit. So for those of you that have used Data Fetcher, hone in on this one, because this is essentially our solution to the success of Data Fetcher. This is essentially the sibling component of action buttons. We want to be able to tie auto-launched flows to a screen. So based off of the inputs of that action, we can run an auto-launch flow to feed data into your screen. So here is a classic example where you've got like an agent searching for cases based off of a case subject and having it pull records real time. Like how mind-blowing is that, right? You could do anything. If it's an auto-launch flow, like run an invocable action, run some cool AI focused actions within there. Like the world is your oyster. I'm really excited for this one. Hopefully we'll be able to get it in late in the year, but it's high on my list for sure. The next one, I'm well aware we have lots to do around data table. We're trying to fit in things as we go, but one biggie is that our data table doesn't support Apex defined types or external data. So you can't display the results of a callout, results of a transform in our data table. And that's a big deal. So we want to make sure that we support that in the future, because we have people doing some interesting things to try to get that to work today, or they just use custom components. The last one is seemingly small, but I think going to be a really big crowd pleaser, is what I'm calling reactive input validation. So let's say you've got a really long form today and you've got some validation on those fields. What if you put in the wrong account name that the admin expected? Well, today, if you hit next, you'll get that error, but that's not really what people are expecting, right? If you spent 2 minutes on a screen and you suddenly find out that the first input that you filled in is wrong, it's not a great experience for you to find out at the very end that it was wrong. So we want to have input validation trigger when you focus out of an input. So I'm really excited to be able to tackle that one, because I know that has plagued people for a long time. All right, so let me just quickly scan the chat here. All right. So there's a lot of good things in here I'll save for the Q&A. So we're going to share the trail mix here in just a second, but I did want to call out some common gotchas that I've seen with reactivity. This is kind of all condensed from our help docs, which are also available in the trail mix. But here are the most common things that I've observed and mistakes people have made. Your flow has to be API version 59 and above. So that means any old flows need to be upgraded. Next is mappings between components. So that reactivity, the way you set it up, they have to be the same data type. So text to text, number to number, but you can always use formulas to convert between data types if you need to. And then next is, if you're adding numbers, make sure you're using the blank value function to convert any null or empty strings to 0, so that reactivity will kick in. Next one is also a fairly common one. You always have to use automatic output. So simply just when you set up the component, you then reference it. You cannot manually set variables. So there's an advanced section in most components where you can set outputs to specific variables. That will not work. So you have to use automatic outputs for now. Any custom components you have to be wired up properly for reactivity. So in our trail mix, there's also a guide for developers on the best practices on wiring up your components so that they're ready for reactivity. And lastly, this is less of a big deal now because we support far more, but most of our out-of-the-box components are now reactive. So we have a handy-dandy doc that outlines which ones are and aren't. Collection choice sets being a common one, which is planned for summer 24. File upload and image are also 2 others that are not yet reactive. And then lastly, I think Zaina is going to be pushing this URL into our chat. But of course, I think this is going to be recorded, right, Zaina? So people can always take a screenshot.
Yeah, absolutely.
To check out the trail mix. So this is a trail mix that I actually curate. It's got so much good stuff in it. It's got TDX presentations, automate this sessions from Jennifer Lee, blog posts, modules, whatever you need. It's like a one-stop shop for reactivity. All right.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that really interesting presentation, Adam. Hopefully everyone attending now has a much better idea of how to harness the power of reactive components in their screen flows. So now it's time for our Q&As. If you have any questions for Adam, please feel free to submit them in the comments below, and we'll try to get round to as many as possible.
Right.
Okay, let's see what we have here. So I think you stopped answering questions around the half-pass mark. So let's see. Nicola is asking, any news on record type picklets being filtered based on user permissions on the screen flow too?
So right now we have record type filtering in record fields. So if you need record type filtering, you can do that. I do recognize that is something that we need to add for choices. We are kind of limited right now with that experience and how you could set that up from our resource picker that you totally unrelated release note, but something we're also working on is overhauling the selection experience. So our resource picker, one thing that we need to be able to have a user select a record type properly is for that to be in place. So it's on our minds. We want to do it. We want to do it in a way that's user friendly. And so my answer would be eventually, if you need something that's not record fields, so something that's baked into our choice framework, we're still in the weeding game there, unfortunately.
Thank you. So next one, any plan to have reactive dynamic choice options?
Mm-hmm. Yep, so that's coming next release. So if you checked out the animated GIF there, so using action buttons, you can dynamically generate choice options based off of the results of an action. So that's essentially coming next release.
Cool. Please share the link that teaches how to use SLDS classes on display text. Yeah, I'm sure you could do that after the session.
Yeah, actually, so that's also in the trail mix. So at the very end, I linked to an unofficial SF article from Jeff Granz that talks through how we did that fancy SLDS styling within the display text.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
So how about not having lookup field column display record name instead of record ID values?
How about not having lookup field column? Sorry, some double negatives here. I'm trying to put that in my head. Not display instead of record value. I guess I'm a little confused. So what lookup can do is it can just output a name and a record ID. So I guess is the ask there to not display the name, but to display the record ID as they're selecting records potentially. What they could also do, so we have two lookup options in Flow. We have our usual lookup option, and then we also have choice lookup. So choice lookup could give you that flexibility. And one cool thing is with action buttons, choice lookup will be able to be dynamic. So if you don't actually know yet what records you want populated, oh, it looks like he meant data table. Well, still relevant either way. If you wanted to use dynamic data within your choice lookup, you'll be able to pair it with action buttons, which I think is going to be super cool. And so I guess the question was actually about data table. So for record names, oh boy, yeah. So when I talked before about the number of gaps that we need filled for data table, that's a biggie. Right under Apex type support is something that I want to do for bringing in related record data, which includes record names. Related record names, I fully recognize that that is a pain point and people have to use formula fields to fill that gap today. It is high on my list to look at.
Cool, thank you. Any plans to include validation on file upload component to ensure a user uploads at least one file to proceed?
Oh man, so our file upload component needs a lot of love. I'll be open about that. So fun fact, that component was not actually built by the Flow team. It was built by our files team, and they are in the process of converting the base file upload component, so not even tied to Flow. They're in the process of converting that to LWC. Once that happens, we're going to be asking them to help us convert that to LWC, hopefully adding in a few more attributes to make it a little more user-friendly for people. So I'm hopeful that that'll have some movement here in the next year. Sam Radar and myself are both very vocal about getting them to improve that. And hopefully with your all's feedback on the idea exchange, we can make that happen.
Nice. Okay. Is there anything planned for custom lead conversion?
I'm not quite sure I understand that because it's not really tied to Flow, but maybe it's referring to like out of the box flows potentially. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that one.
Okay. So how about native support for displaying non-record data in a data table?
Yep. So that's actually related to the second item in our roadmap. So around external data and Apex defined types. So eventually when we support non-record data, so in our world, it's where they're called Apex defined types, you'll be able to do that. So as soon as we're able to support that, it'll work.
Nice. Thank you. It would be cool to control how big the ScreenFlow screen is once launched via a button. Is this on the map?
You know, it's funny. when we started on the reactivity project, immediately, actually, I think it was data table. I was like, well, that quick action modal is kind of small. So I kind of explored the idea of like, what would it take to increase that modal size? So that experience, the quick actions, button actions, or related list actions, that's all owned by our actions team, still on the platform. But we've been hopeful in getting that in, but there's been some changes in priorities and roadmap. I would encourage everyone to just continue to vote on the idea exchange on that. We don't own the quick action experience, so I'm with you. We need a bigger modal, so hopefully with your support, we can help make that happen.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned showing the UI UX via Salesforce styling. Can you provide that link? Will you be able to do that after the session? Yeah,
yep.
Cool.
Yep, that's all in the trail mix.
Nice.
The very end. I think it's the last entry.
Fab. Okay, so what about run failed flow interviews?
So I guess it's not really specific to reactivity, but I assume the ask there is if a flow has failed to rerun it to try and get it to be successful. I don't think that that's anywhere on our radar, to be honest.
Okay. Any plans to make pick list choice sets rely on established field dependencies?
That's probably referring to like controlling pick lists. So they can use the dependent pick list component to do that for sure. Or they could use record fields, which record field pick lists, which do respect controlling field dependencies.
Okay. Thank you. Is branding / stylizing screen flows on the roadmap, or is this one of those things you are recommending we use existing third-party apps to do?
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, not this year. It's a big beast to slay. So right now, if you embed a flow in a community, it will kind of respect the styling options of the community. You can always embed it in an LWC to achieve styling. We have a lot of customers that do that. But as far as like out of the box styling, it's coming. Kind of just focusing on our internal employee use cases where we're not exposing flows to customers outside of your own company. So usually that entails strong branding requirements. We'll get there, but we're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Will you offer ways to expand ScreenFlow modal size to full width from a custom action?
Yeah, same deal. We don't own the action framework, and we're hopeful that they'll be able to get to that soon.
When will we be able to copy and paste elements between different flows?
That'll be a while, to be honest. I think you're probably more likely to see screen component copying sooner than inter-screen copying. We know it's a great productivity gain, but it's not something that we're currently looking at the moment. Mm-hmm. But things can always change from release to release. So
yeah,
I would just encourage everyone to vote on it.
Okay. So login screen flow sizing, will this become customizable?
So again, we don't actually own login flows, so that is owned by a different team. But I do know that they are in the midst of making some changes there. So I can certainly pass on the feedback. If there's an ID exchange post, I'd love for a link to that, if you wouldn't mind logging that too, so we can pass it along to them.
Yeah. So is it planned to have a ScreenFlow opening as a pop-up when set as list view button?
Yeah, same deal. We don't own that experience, but I do know that it is on their roadmap for sure, because I know that they recently enabled list view actions. It's just not flows at the moment, so it is on their list. I don't even think it's next release, but I think it is on the tail end of the next 3 releases.
Okay, nice, thank you. So what about the bugginess of how images in a ScreenFlow display distorted when the screen is open as a pop-up modal versus embedded on a Lightning page?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I would actually ask for that one to be posted in like the Trailhead community, the Trailblazer community, for an example, because without knowing how it was built, it's hard to say for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can we get a better UI to deactivate / delete flow versions involved?
Oh man, I'm a squeaky wheel on this one. I agree. It's very annoying going from our current flow list view to trying to get to all the versions. I'm quite vocal about this one, so I'm hopeful that that's gonna come. We are in the midst of a brand new way to manage your flows, or at least look at your flows. So I would definitely keep your eye on the release notes and release readiness live for next release, because I don't want to spill anyone's beans on this call, because there are some cool things happening on that space.
Okay. Will full CRUD support come to data table, or should action buttons be the standard?
I will never enable direct CRUD in data table. That's just not a good idea. What we will hopefully do is allow you to edit the collection within a data table. So with a combination of inline editing and action buttons, or action between screens, that'll be a possibility. But I don't think I'll ever allow someone to directly edit records from a data table. I just don't think it's a good idea for a number of reasons. But if the actual ask is for inline editing, I would say that's probably third or so on my list of things that I want to get to for data table. But I would say below Apex type support and getting related records to render, properly with record names, for example.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Patrick is asking, is there a solution to get rid of the flow error mails if the error was caught by a fault connector?
Not that I'm aware of, but I know that our team that manages errors is aware of it. Keep providing that feedback, but I'm not aware of any any solutions that prevent those errors from being sent.
Okay, nice. Any plans to look into ScreenFlow performance when being launched for the first time from a Lightning action in the UI? Our users have a long delay for the flow to initialize.
I would actually maybe either create a case or log it in the ID Exchange, the Trailblazer community on that, because there are a lot of factors that could be at play there, namely like how many custom components you have in it, how much Apex do you have in the org, because we do some caching and some things behind the scenes that sometimes, so it's really hard to say, because for some orgs it's very snappy, but for others apparently it's not. So that sounds like something is wrong. So they should probably create a case and have us look at it.
Mm-hmm. What are the plans to fix the data table bug that doesn't accept a default value?
So let's see. If I'm reading this correctly, it's the fact that if you're in single select mode, you have to have a collection. I wouldn't say that's a bug. I would say that's more of just a design expectation difference. That's a good point. I would say ID Exchange potentially. I haven't really actually had that feedback before, so that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
But but before you enter the screen, you could always just assign your collection to assign your single variable to a collection and accomplish it that way. So that could be an approach.
Okay. So will better organization of flows in the back end be implemented beyond just list views?
Well, better than the back end beyond just list. Good question. So we don't really have a current plan for organization. So around folders, we've kind of thrown around some ideas because we want to fix it holistically. I like the idea. I like the way that like reports and dashboards do it. So I'm hopeful that one day we'll be able to get to something like that. But we are, like I said, upgrading the list view experience in flows, and again, not spoiling anything too much right now. But stay tuned next release for something cool there. But hopefully we can then take it from there and move into better flow organization.
Very cool. If there are no more questions, I'm just waiting for any to pop up.
Yeah, and I think there were some earlier questions that I didn't get to in the beginning. So let me see.
We've just got one in now. Shanti is asking, is there a way to collect the collection from data table to a field in Salesforce?
Yeah, that's probably need a little bit more detail on that one. I don't quite understand what the ask there is.
Okay.
So that would be a Trailblazer community ask.
Is time fields support on the roadmap?
Not yet, but those types of things are always like type of situations where it might not be on our roadmap, and then all of a sudden it is because we have a team building internally that really needs it. But right now, no. I'd love to see the use case for sure, like in the Trailblazer community, and feel free to tag me and I can send it along to some of the other PMs.
Cool. For record triggered flows, can we get the object type listed in the list view for all flows in setup?
So I specifically tied to screen flows. So I have a decent picture into what's on other teams' roadmaps, but I can't say that one is. And I will also say again, we're like reimagining the flow list view experience, so that might be something that could be looked at as we make some improvements. But yeah, for now, I'm not quite sure, to be honest.
Okay, fab. I think we're coming up to the hour, so unfortunately that's all we've got time for today. So thank you so much to everyone for attending. We hope you've gained valuable insights into how to maximize productivity and enhance user experiences with reactive screen flows. I'd like to extend a big thank you to Adam for sharing his expertise and insights with us today. Before we sign off, any final words, Adam?
No, I'm just really excited for everyone to dive in. We've been working on reactivity for a long time, and we've got really just an awesome roadmap coming ahead. So, if you've liked the past year, you're going to like the next year just as much, if not more.
Yeah, nice. Great. Well, thank you again to everyone for attending, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Brennan. Bye, everyone.